In general, I've thought about this quite a lot, which is not to say that I've thought about it correctly, but I've thought about it a lot. The one of the bigger risks on Earth would be, that we need to transition to sustainable energy. Even if one discounts the CO2 capacity of the oceans and atmosphere, eventually we will run out of hydrocarbons to burn, and so we need something that's long-term sustainable. So that's sort of I kind of split my time between Tesla and SpaceX, and so Tesla's trying to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy, and that's to mitigate the risk on Earth, and then SpaceX is intended to mitigate like longer-term risks that could potentially extinguish consciousness as we know it. I mean, we got this sort of delicate candle of consciousness sort of flickering in the darkness here. And I don't know if you guys have seen any evidence of aliens, but I sure haven't. I get asked that a lot. So, I think the Fermi paradox is just an incredibly interesting question. And I'm not sure who said it, but there appear to be, if there's either a lot of aliens or none, and those answers are equally terrifying. But with respect to nearer term risks on Earth, obviously sustainable energy and potential non-linearities in the CO2 ppm in the atmosphere are a concern. If we start doing things like melting the Siberian tundra and that kind of thing. I'm probably less alarmist than most on climate change. I put myself in the moderate category on climate change. I just think it's the amount of inertia associated with the hydrocarbon economy is so gigantic that it will require a long time to make that transition. And so it's probably better to start it sooner rather than later. And that's why I describe the fundamental good of Tesla as the degree to which it accelerates the advent of sustainable energy. It will happen, I think, anyway, but faster is better. Then, as for risks on Earth, there's always good old nuclear Armageddon. That's still one of the things. That's not out of the question. There's still a lot of nuclear missiles pointed at us in the U.S. and many parts of the world. I don't know what quite that risk is, but it's not zero. I think there's maybe some counterintuitive risks or that people don't put that much attention on. If you look at the birth rate trends, the birth rate trends are very negative, and so and in many countries are seeing population decline with no end in sight. So I think there's I think the very low birth rate, I think, is actually quite a significant risk, but an underappreciated one. And for population prediction, I would recommend taking things like the number of babies born last year and just multiplying that by the probable lifespan. And if you do that, I think you'll see numbers that are very, very bad for future population. And with an inverted demographic pyramid. So you've got a lot more older people and then fewer middle-aged people and then eventually just very few youngsters. And this will necessarily lead to resources being applied to taking care of the elderly instead of advancing science or advancing civilization. I'm quite worried about that one because I see no reversal of the trend. That would, civilization will die with a bang or a whimper. That would be dying with a whimper. Then there's obviously, of course, a pandemic that's like COVID, but which has a much higher mortality, sort of a long, high contagion, highly contagious, long incubation period, high mortality type of pandemic. That's clearly a risk. AI is, I think, maybe more of a risk than people realize. Ironically, the smart people tend to think AI is less of a risk because they think that they're so smart, but actually we're just humans and we're quite dumb. It's amazing we got this far, frankly. So if you see the advancement of AI, it's clear that AI will exceed human intelligence in every way if these trends continue. And the list of things that the human mind can do better than AI is less and less every year. So, hopefully that AI is coupled to human will, but it might not be. The long-term goal of Neuralink is to achieve sort of better symbiosis with AI and with the kind of human mind. In the short term, Neuralink, I think, will help solve a lot of brain injuries and diseases and spinal injuries and that kind of thing. But long term, because one of the things that I'm getting quite esoteric here, but we're already a cyborg, really, in the sense that our phones and computers are an extension of ourselves, and you could say we arguably have the primitive kind of limbic system, the cortex, the higher thinking, and then we've got a tertiary layer, which is silicon, in the form of our computers and phones and everything. We have already somewhat merged with computers, but the issue we have is the communication rate, the bandwidth with the computers is low, especially output. If our output is 2 thumbs, that's we're talking maybe 10 bits per second or something like that. No, or maybe 100 best case. It's a very slow output. And as the intelligence of the computer grows, if that communication link remains very tiny, I think we will necessarily decouple from computers just because our rate of communication is very slow. And so if we can solve the I/O bandwidth question and by increase it by 1,000 or more, maybe 1 million, then you could have human-machine symbiosis that is much better. I mean, that's at least one approach. Let's see, what else is there? Religious extremism, if that grows over time, religious extremism is certainly a threat to advancement of science. So depending on how far that goes, that could be an issue. The great filters. So I think at least one of the great filters is, does a civilization become multiplanetary or not? Yes. If a civilization does not become multiplanetary, then eventually the sun's going to expand and boil the ocean, and that's game over. So, and actually, if you think about it from a percentage standpoint, if Earth's been around 4.5 billion years, then it took us 1.5 billion years to get this far. It may be as soon as another 500 million years, and the sun might have expanded enough by that time to boil the oceans, potentially. It's not 500 million years, it's not much beyond that. Which is basically means that if it took 10% longer for civilization to evolve, it would never have evolved.